Hello, everybody. Talia is here, and welcome back to Healing MS. Today, I have with me Dr. John Dempster. He's a board certified in both naturopathic and functional medicine. He's the founder of the Dempster Clinic, Center for Functional Medicine, located in Toronto, Canada. He focuses on functional medicine model to treat patients ranging from high-performance individuals to those wanting to treat or prevent chronic illnesses. Dr. Dempster is the founder of the Healthy Gut Institute, an online program designed to help identify and treat the root cause of chronic digestive issues. Dr. Dempster, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Well, I'm good, Talia. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. So I want to start with asking you, as a person that lives with MS, I have seen a lot of doctors in my life. And most of the doctors are so different than what I've learned about you. You know, they're like, oh, you have a headache? Oh, you don't feel good? Take a pill, take a pill, take a pill. It's always the same answer. So I'm really curious to know, how did you get to functional medicine and to what you practice?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's a great question. It's one I get a lot. You know, I grew up heading into medicine, not knowing any difference between, regular medicine and any other types of medicine that were out there. So I was heading to be a medical doctor, and literally up until the 11th hour, that was the game plan, up until I learned a lot more about what naturopathic medicine could offer. My personal interest has always been biology and clinical nutrition and biochemistry. So to me, a lot of that nutrition interest that I had, it was being better answered through a naturopathic medical degree. And when I went through and became a naturopathic doctor, I was still always asking questions. What can we do to help a root cause resolution, and how can we bridge cutting edge technology and science and really bring together a core program for somebody? So while I was studying, one of my dear friends was dealing with an autoimmune condition called Crohn's disease. And anybody who's listening, I know that many of your listeners are have MS interests, but Crohn's disease is a very debilitating autoimmune disease. And this was just something that we started to work together just as a case project for one of my classes. And this is pre-internet, so I'm kind of dating myself, Talia, but we actually hit the books, and we put him on a special eating plan, and he got off all his medications for his inflammatory bowel disease within 2 months. And he hasn't looked back. And this was many years ago. So that really had piqued my interest as to talking about the power of natural medicine and the power of food and diet and environment, and all these other questions started to come into my head after the fact, which led me to becoming formally trained in functional medicine. And this was something that, if this is a new term to anybody listening, functional medicine is really an extension of naturopathic medicine, but it's using state-of-the-art technology and different types of lab diagnostics. And the real philosophy is to treat the root of the problem, treat the individual, not just the label. So I could have a number of MS patients that come to me in any given day. And while there may still be some fundamentals that apply to all of them, there's going to be some very specific nuances to each patient that comes through the door. So that's a very quick explanation as to how I became a naturopathic doctor practicing functional medicine.
Love it. Exciting. It's so different than what most of us are hearing every day. And what talked to me the most is the it's working with the individual. We're not all the same. Yes, we all have MS. People all they have those diseases, but there's so many things that make it different to treat. And you're talking about the cause, right? Like, what is the root cause? We keep hearing there's nobody knows. What have you specifically, if you could say about MS and in general in autoimmune diseases, what could be possible causes?
There's a number of buckets. I call these buckets, a number of areas that we need to start to look at when we're dealing with MS. And one of the big buckets, and hence why I'm probably chatting with you today, is my interest in the gut health. And the more research that we know with the impact of gut, it goes far beyond just digestive processes. In fact, the gut is the gateway to almost any health condition. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of literature being accumulated in this area right now. So if we have somebody that comes through the door and they've been given the label of multiple sclerosis, We want to sit down and we want to start at the most fundamental baseline possible so that we can build on that and move forward. And I truly believe that there's a role to play for Western medicine and many other types of medicine when we're dealing with autoimmune disease. But our approach is different in the sense that we want to start to remove some of the underlying obstacles that are aggravating the symptoms of MS and aggravating the disease progression itself. And while nobody knows a cure for MS right now, there's no one magic cure for this at the moment through any means. We are seeing patients improve when they take an integrative support. And obviously, utilizing Western medicine can be helpful to mitigate some of the symptoms. So we work with patients who are on medications, for example. But when it comes to that foundation, the gut to me is the gateway. And this is something that a lot of inflammation, this is a word that we use a lot with patients with MS and other autoimmune disease, a lot of that inflammation begins in our gut. And that can be caused by foods. There could be foods that you're eating that your body does not like, and there's many degrees of that. There could be literally an allergy, which is the most obvious form. There could be a sensitivity, which is something that we measure with our patients. And you can measure these with different antibody blood tests, such as an IgA, IgM, or an IgG test. And there's going to be intolerances, and some of these intolerances can be measured and some of them can't be. And they're more of just a generalized adverse reaction to a food. But foods are a big part of, in general speaking, they're a very big part of medicine. Let food be thy medicine is what Hippocrates told us. So we need to make sure that we are always addressing some of those core factors. That is not the only aspect to gut health, though. And I know I'm chatting a lot about gut health, but it's so important that we begin this conversation, Telly, in this area, because now we have another conversation of another aspect of gut health that has to do with what's going on inside the gut with all the different microbes. And this is called our gut microbiome. And we have microbiomes all over our body, but your gut microbiome is your biggest and your most significant one when it comes to disease progression, especially autoimmune disease. And this is a combination of bacteria, viruses, yeast, parasites. There's a number of possible scenarios that can be going on. And just to give you a very quick idea of the impact of the microbiome, think of your whole body right now. Think of, like, if you look at your hands and you look at your whole body, think of how many trillions of cells constitute a human body. Well, take that number and times it by by 10. And 10 is the number of, we outnumber our human cells 10 to 1 by bacterial cells in our gut. And so what we need to realize is that, okay, wait a second here. This is not just what we see skin deep. There's a lot more going on. In fact, the amount of bacterial DNA that's going on inside of our gut outnumbers our human DNA 100 to 1. So I say that just to put a little bit of light onto the potential power of what's going on with the microbiome inside of us. So those are some very key areas that we start to look at right away. And there's many ways and many levels of depth that we take to look at this. We tend to do a lot of testing with our patients, and that can start to shed some insights and take away some of the guesswork, if you will. But there's still some common sense that needs to go into this as well. So we take that full system approach, starting with the gut for any MS patient that walks in our door.
What do you commonly find when you work with MS patients?
So we often will find, and if you're referring specifically to the gut, we often find some disturbances going on in there on the microbiome level. Often there's some bacterial imbalances. There can also be yeast and parasites involved too. There's no one common thread there, but often there's a disruption to what are called pathogenic organisms, and we're seeing some of those. And they can come from anything. They can come from contaminated water, food. They can come from even just your local environments. And this is why it is important to pay attention to what we're doing with hygiene, but not to be germophobic either. And we want to make sure that we're not scared of bugs, that we're just making sure that we're not letting the bad ones in, and that we're supporting the growth of our good bacteria. Another big finding that we see is our good and beneficial bacteria are often not where they should be. There's often signs of what's called dysbiosis, and that's an imbalance between good and bad bacteria. And so the tools are getting better and better all the time. And I truly believe that in 5 years from now, we're going to have even much better ways of measuring these environments in our body. But right now, those are some very big areas that we see some common threads from a gut perspective. We are also seeing a lot of signs of inflammation. And there's different markers that can tell us different levels of inflammation, such as calprotectin and lactoferrin. But there's also certain markers called zonulin, and that can give us a sense of if there's something called intestinal permeability. This is known as leaky gut. And there's many different ways of understanding to have an idea if leaky gut is actually going on. But there's more and more research suggesting that this is actually a real thing and that it is important to heal and seal the gut lining for anybody with MS.
How did somebody know that they have leaky gut?
They won't know anything by looking at the mirror, unfortunately. This is why when we start to understand a little bit more of the nuances going on with their biochemistry, we can get some insights. So as I alluded to earlier, there are some biomarkers that can be run. Zonulin is one of them that can give us some information. There's another test called lactulose mannitol challenge. And again, none of these are pathognomonic, meaning that they're going to be the defining key to that, but they're going to give you some pieces of the puzzle that suggest that there's some issues going on with the integrity of your gut cells. And really the importance of having good gut cell integrity is so that you don't get things into your bloodstream that shouldn't be there. There's a barrier called the intestinal barrier, and that's meant to keep out different types of toxins, different types of undigested food particles, different types of environmental debris that shouldn't be coming into our bloodstream. But if you've got a barrier that's wide open and things are getting in there that shouldn't be getting in there, that is going to aggravate that theory and that discussion of inflammation that I spoke to earlier. And a lot of MS patients are dealing with different degrees of inflammatory assaults in their body that are not being controlled. And we want to understand, okay, what can we do to start to control some of these fires within? The gut is where it starts. It doesn't end there, but it certainly starts there. And that's why we take such great depths of trying to help patients by understanding the gut levels first. One of my many analogies that I deal with patients is your gut is when you're doing when you're doing a new build for a home. You don't put the roof on right away. You've got to dig the earth out. You've got to lay the foundation. You've got to pour the cement. You've got to let that foundation dry. You can't start putting walls up and floors up until that cement is dry and you've got a strong foundation. That is the gut. And so, we may be talking about nutrients for MS. We may be talking about specific toxins, heavy metals and hormonal imbalances and so forth. But you've got to make sure that you are stepping off in the right direction. And a lot of that really begins with having a very healthy gut lining.
What would you say is, in world like today, it's very easy to be exposed to different toxins or to bad food that we consume. Bad things are everywhere. So what would you say is the most dangerous for our body, and people should make, the conscious choice to constantly avoid?
In terms of food, there's a number of areas that we can follow here. Number one, it kind of comes back to identifying what foods create an immune response in your body. And some of those are obvious, some of them are not obvious, but there's a lot of research that really points the finger at a couple of key groups of foods that anyone dealing with MS needs to, if they haven't heard of these, they need to really start to pay attention to these. One is the gluten group, and that's not news to many people listening right now, but it's so deeply vetted in the research that we've got to pay attention to the impact of what gluten can do to autoimmunity. And so the gluten foods contain barley, rye, wheat, and spelt, but they're found in many, many other things. And so this is an important thing to look at. Gluten is a neuroendocrine disruptor. And multiple sclerosis being what it is, we don't want to be messing with the neurological system any way that we can avoid that is ideal. So there are these degrees of sensitivities and reactions to foods, gluten being the main one. The other big one to be careful of has to do with industry produced dairy. And I say industry produced because big agriculture has a role to play with the foods that are on our grocery store shelves, but there are pros and cons to that in many ways. And we're learning more and more of that as we go. And so dairy that's been pasteurized and that's potentially been drawn from cows that might be under stress or duress, or that have been fed a lot of grain as opposed to grass-fed, possibly exposed to chemical compounds and so forth. So there's different degrees of quality of foods. And I'm not talking about quality as a sense that, it's contaminated with bacteria and things like that. A lot of the grocery stores are doing a great job with that. But if you're not eating organic foods, you're eating foods that have been exposed to industrial chemicals. And those are things that are, again, massive neuroendocrine disruptors. So anything that we can do to reduce the exposure to these things is very powerful. So dairy is a big one that can also be very inflammatory due to the pasteurization process. And a long time ago, pasteurization saved a lot of lives because it was cleaning out a lot of the bacterial elements that were coming from unsanitary environments and from very sick and unwell animals due to the way that they were being raised. But we now realize that there's possibly some connections to having an over-pasteurized protein in the form of dairy and the fact that that can be inflammatory. So there's still some investigation going on in that, but there's been some questions raised with that. So those are two big food groups, but I alluded to the fact that eating organic is very important. Anything that you can do to reduce your chemical burden or your chemical load is going to help anyone dealing with MS. And we live in a toxic soup. Anyone who lives in an urban environment, this is impossible to be perfect. So don't put that pressure on you of trying to do everything right. But if there are ways that you can make choices in your day to lower your exposure, it does add up and it does create a critical mass for you. So those are some key things from a food standpoint. Other big areas from a toxic standpoint that we want to be very careful with have to do with heavy metals. And heavy metals have a big connection to play with the neurological system in the body and with many autoimmune diseases beyond MS as well. But these are things such as mercury, lead, aluminum, nickel, arsenic, cadmium. A lot of these things you'd be thinking, okay, well, I haven't been exposed to them. But in fact, we actually don't know. And the amount of my patients that we measure for these metals and find high levels that totally catches us, not us off guard, but in a sense surprises the patient, because they don't know where they've been exposed to these, is very common. We see a lot of elevated metals in individuals with autoimmune disease. And there's ways of getting them out, which is very important to know. But mercury, that can come in many forms. Lead can come in from many different sources. So can arsenic, cadmium, and so forth. So those are a very important category of toxins that need to be looked at when we're doing a workup with somebody with multiple sclerosis.
So you basically find it out and then find ways to clear their body from it as part of the reversing the disease?
So number one is don't treat anything that is unnecessary. But if we find that somebody has metals that are elevated, there are strategies depending on the metal, there's different strategies, but you can remove these metals from your body. And we also want to remove them from their environment so they're not re-exposed. So, lead, we want to make sure that their plumbing is not bringing in lead through their plumbing. We want to make sure that their paints are not off-gassing, that their cutlery and their kitchenware, there's different types of glazes that can be on different dishes and potteries and so forth. These are all things that can be some general sources that we start to look at right away. But there's also big industry that, sometimes we can't avoid this. I don't know about you, Talia, but growing up, there was, leaded gasoline was still very common. And, that's where a lot of people have been exposed to lead, and it gets stored in different organs and tissues in our body. And when we go through and we actually do a proper urine challenge, you can measure it through urine and blood. And ideally looking at both is helpful, but what's called a provocative urine challenge will help actually go deeper into the tissues and pull out any levels so that we can see where they stand. And mercury can be coming from all sorts of sources too, industry as well. But a lot of anyone who's got silver amalgam fillings from their dentist needs to be looking at their mercury levels. Anybody who's had histories of vaccines, and this is not an anti-vaccine comment, it's just in the past many vaccines had elements of mercury called thimerosal present in them. Anybody who's eaten large fish over the years, such as tuna, swordfish, or shark, we've got to look at the bioaccumulation of the amounts of mercury that goes on in our oceans. And the larger the fish, the more they bioaccumulate. And these are very potent neuroendocrine disruptors. So once again, I use that word because this is a very important part of helping somebody truly start to get in their best healing environment. While there is no cure, there are many things you can do to be proactive and to allow your body get into its optimal state of health and healing to give people a chance to potentially start to see improvement in their gait, to see improvement in many other functions in their body that haven't been so great if they've got advanced forms of MS. So that's just one key area of toxicity that we look at with our patients, but that's an important one to touch on.
So you're finding what is basically not supporting one's health, and you start working in different ways to remove it. Is that all, or you're also suggesting to add something, whether it's diet, whether it's like the space?
Great question. So yeah, we want to remove stuff that shouldn't be there. We also want to measure things that aren't there in an adequate amount as well. And we are going to talk about that in the sense of that we spend a lot of time measuring nutrient levels and balancing those and restoring those if needed. And there are multiple nutrients that need to be looked at for an optimal level of health and well-being in the body. And, sure, there's some nutrients that get a lot more fanfare than others out there right now, but we've got to look at the full spectrum. And we do a workup with our patients that looks at over 35 different nutrient markers that can give us a sense of really what's going on in our body, but on a deeper level as well. And so we want to make sure that we're handpicking the nutrients that each person is individually missing, but there's those core macronutrients that we hear a lot about with MS too. And we want to make sure that we're paying attention to vitamin D. We want to pay attention to different omega levels, omega-3s in particular.
Can you repeat what you just said? Your sound went out a little bit after the vitamin D.
Omega-3s. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to omega-3s. Again, we're measuring to see if there's other nutrients involved, but omega-3s are a very important part of understanding how we can protect the myelin sheath and really create an anti-inflammatory environment in the body. But there's a number of different neurological vitamins as well, and B vitamins are part of that, and so are different minerals. So, I wouldn't care to say, these are the only vitamins to look at, but these are the ones that we start to measure and bring up to speed. When it comes to adding in foods, very important. We want to make sure that we're eating a full meal. This is not about, a lot of times I think patients with different varying types of autoimmune disease, they go on very restrictive diets. And again, some of these can be very helpful, but we also don't want to restrict eating so much that you're not eating at all. And so we really try to take the time, and we have nutritionists that we work with in our clinic that I will start to identify foods that we should be adding more or taking them out. But then we really find a way to make it really pragmatic for patients and very practical, so that they're not feeling like they're on the dreaded air and water diet. And it's not to say that there's not benefits to fasting. There certainly is, but we've got to make this sustainable for somebody. And so we teach and educate patients how to eat as well.
Do you specifically support a certain type of diet? I mean, in the MS world, there's certain ones that are very common, and then you'll find big groups are following, but there are actually big differences between them.
Yeah, and that's why we don't actually. We, as I said, we'll certainly subscribe to some macro elements that I've already touched on today, but we customize this to the patient as much as we can, because there's going to be pros and cons. So some patients will do great on one diet, some patients won't. For example, a keto diet or Mediterranean diet or whatever it is for somebody, whatever label of eating plan they've been given to try. Some patients are going to do well, and some patients won't. And so we try to look at the common denominators. A lot of those we've touched on, but we want to make sure that we're patient-centered in our approach.
Can people really understand from the reaction of the body right away after eating something that they're either sensitive to, like you said, or allergic to? Because there's time for the body to process from the time we consume it.
It depends on what reaction it's happening. And allergies is generally a very immediate reaction. And we actually spend less time talking about allergies with our patients because they're less common. Sensitivity is a degree of allergy. So a lot of patients use those terms interchangeably. So it's important to understand the distinguishing differences is that a sensitivity is just a delayed allergy, and it can be delayed by up to 14 days. So it's not that easy to figure out if somebody is reacting to that grilled cheese. As much as they want to eat grilled cheese every day, they're like, I feel fine. But what can happen is 3 to 5 to 7 days later, there could be the onset of a flare, or there could be, just starting to feel not quite right, and on many levels. And it's not to say that those foods cause MS, but they may start to aggravate the inflammatory pool And the more that becomes aggravated, the more of a situation we have in front of us here. So, yeah, that's sort of the approach we take with that.
It's interesting how the same experience can be used in two different ways. It reminds me of a conversation I had not long ago with somebody that has MS, and we were talking about her diet. I was just asking some questions out of surprise, from hearing what she eats. And she said, "Oh, I have a leaky gut as well. I have to stay on the same diet that I am right now." And it was very clear that, nobody should eat certain, like you said, gluten is bad for everybody. It's not only because if you have an autoimmune disease, but and my sister actually also have Crohn's disease, and I know that, and she eats gluten. She eats bread. She's like, when I eat it, it relaxes my stomach. So there's some experience that our body is having, and like, how can somebody really understand when the body is not exactly communicating immediately?
Well, I think that's the whole point of doing a workup where you're gathering data. And sure, there are going to be some things that your body can intuitively tell and speak to you. And the more in tune somebody is, and often many of my patients who are quite ill become very in tune with their body if they aren't already when they walk into the door. But and just to be clear, not everybody responds poorly to gluten. I think there's some research that suggests the more gluten you eat, the more at risk you are of having an issue. But not everybody responds poorly to gluten. It is on the highest probably category of risk factor foods for anybody dealing with autoimmune disease, definitely. But there's different genetic markers that can be measured. There's different immune markers that can be measured to understand the full severity of somebody's reaction. So I think that's really the point that I think is important to make, is when there's a lot of guessing going on, you really want to start to pay attention to the logical approach of things, but you want to start to gather some data specific and unique to the person. And so that you can really cater to their unique needs and to their, I call them blind spots, things that you can't see or feel right away, but things that are going on in your body and processes that are going on that can be uncovered, that are like little pieces of a big giant jigsaw puzzle. And if you start to put those pieces together bit by bit by bit, you get a better healing environment for them. And all the way back to the beginning when we talked about inflammation, we have better means of managing those inflammatory assaults when you get the optimal systems working together. So, we haven't talked too much about other organs other than the gut, but all of the organs need to be working really well. Your liver needs to be working well. Your kidneys need to be working well. Your endocrine pathways, so your hormones, such as your thyroid, needs to be working really well. All of these things are, you can assess these and you can get a sense if there's areas that we need to focus on more than others.
So in today's world, I know that a lot of people are scared to go to, clinics or different doctors due to the pandemic. Like you're saying, it's every person will have, a different diet that will be supporting them. How do you recommend for somebody that is listening to us right now and want to take action and start taking care of their body? How can they choose without having all the lab tests? And
yeah, it's a great question. And I think right now, which has really been interesting during this pandemic, is the rise of technology and the rise of online resources. And, depending on where somebody's living right now, there's many doctors, many functional doctors that are available online for online appointments. I know we take online appointments, but I would certainly encourage people not to be, just because we can't go into a clinic during a lockdown or something like that, not to feel that they don't have access to healthcare right now. The other thing is, and we've done this in our clinic, is we've created a program that people can start to do online. And ours is called the Healthy Gut Institute, and it can give people some very powerful tools. We have over, I think, 5 hours of video footage and dozens and dozens and dozens of downloadable assets that just gives people a sense of, hey, look, I can start to take control of my health right now while life is on pause as we know it, but we can still start to double down on our health and be proactive. And so I think I would certainly encourage patients and people listening is to look into your communities, look into your local doctors. Feel free to reach out and check out our website, but look in your community and find somebody who's nearby, somebody that you can have a relationship even after the fact. Prior to COVID, we had patients flying in from all around the world to work with us. And obviously that stopped very quickly, but we are still able to help benefit the health and well-being of patients by offering online programs. And these are things for patients to look at.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Thank you for that. And anything else that you can share with our listeners that they can start doing right now to take, their life towards a healthy life?
Well, I think we've nailed on a couple of takeaways already, but the one thing I want to stress and nail home is it's not about doing everything at once. One of the things we have seen, and I've been in practice for 15 years, one of the things that I really emphasize is it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. And literally, if you do one thing that we talked about today, whether it's adding vitamin D or whether it's adding omega-3s or it's cutting out gluten and dairy, these are things that, start to nudge that needle forward bit by bit. And don't feel that you are stalling your progress or failing at anything if you are not perfect. I tell my patients, I say, look, if you can stick to this 80 to 90% of the time, don't worry about the other 10%. Okay. Now, some of my patients, we have to move that needle up to 98% because they're really, really reactive to things that are in the environment. But in general, it's like if we can get to just a critical mass, then it takes the pressure off. And you don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, I accidentally got gluten with my, mother-in-law's meal at Thanksgiving or whatever it may have been. And the final thing I'll leave with you, Talia, is something that everyone can start doing today. And we didn't touch on it too much, but the component of stress is real. And this is, I lecture on this topic a lot as well, but stress has a massive role to play in our health, not only today, but throughout human history. And I think we're under more of it today than we ever have been in a long time. And if there's one thing I can teach everyone listening right now is to reduce and be mindful of what your triggers are in your day. And the easiest exercise to kind of buffer these stressors every single day is to do 10 consecutive deep breaths. Do that once an hour. And this is research that has shown to reduce the impact of stress by up to 40%. And so my patients love this because many of my patients are very busy professionals or busy housewives and whomever. They don't have a lot of time in their day. And so they can do this no matter how busy you are, no matter where you are in the world. It doesn't cost a penny. And by reducing the impact of stress by 40%, you are reducing a number of different inflammatory markers. And you're being proactive starting now. So this is as that first step. You're already doing something better than you did yesterday.
I love that you're sharing this. Start now, even if it's something very small. Dr. Dempster, thank you. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just said absolutely.
I want to thank you for your time, sharing your knowledge with us. And I'm going to share your information. So anybody who's listening to us and would like to contact you, they can easily do that. Thank you so much.
Happy to help, Talia. And thank you for everything that you do.